Coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, day 2 of the NFL owners meetings in Phoenix is in the books, so we'll talk about the highlights or even the lowlights. Plus, Raiders GM Dave Ziegler joined the radio show, so you'll hear that conversation. Your calls and texts will close things out. It's all coming up on Wednesday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, March 29th, 2023.
Just win. Just win. Just win. Just win.
The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down and laugh when he's conquered and won, and won, and won, and won, and won.
Welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to make sure you get the latest episode as soon as it becomes available. And if you're following along on YouTube, it's because my guy Ari has got us held down. Whenever I'm on the road, if I'm in the home studio, if I'm in the radio station studio, he's taking care of us. You can find him on Twitter at Ari Produces. We definitely appreciate him. Not a whole lot of news and notes coming out of the owners' meetings on day 2. And as a matter of fact, it's really wrapped up after day 2. There's a whole lot of nothing going on this Wednesday. And as a matter of fact, we're going to knock out the morning show on Raider Nation Radio 920, myself and Vinny, and then we're both going to get back on the highway and head back to Las Vegas. So there's absolutely nothing going on this Wednesday. Heard from Roger Goodell on Tuesday evening following the radio show. So done deal records. If you haven't heard it already, it's not coming out anytime soon. But there was a couple things that I thought were kind of interesting, and nothing, again, that was earth-shattering. But the NFL owners did approve the fact that you can wear the jersey number 0. And I know that's not a big factor. That has nothing to do with the game, except for some players are going to get excited about that, right? Calvin Ridley, one of the guys, already put out there that he's going to be rocking the number 0 for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And, maybe it's the college football background that I have as far as covering college football and knowing that the players love those single digits. And I remember Matt Rule at Baylor used to make it a big competition to get those single digits and how everyone got excited to be able to rock that number. And that meant that they were one of the better players on the team. They earned that number. And the number 0 is going to be definitely rocked by many different players across the NFL. And really, my only question is, what Raider is going to wear number 0? Would it be a new corner that the Raiders draft, or is it someone that's got to earn it? Is it someone that's already on the roster? I guarantee someone's going to be trying to jockey for that number. And again, it's a minor thing. It has nothing to do with how the game is played or what the outcome of the game is going to be. But for some of these players, they're going to get excited and fired up and want to be able to rock that number. So kind of look out for that. And maybe if you have a suggestion, maybe if you think you know the player that's going to want to get that number 0, I kind of think like a Nate Hobbs might want that number. I do kind of banking money on a new corner that comes to the team. If maybe Christian Gonzalez or Devon Witherspoon gets drafted at number 7 overall, or whenever the Raiders pick first, I could see them wanting to kind of set the tone with that 0. I'll tell you what, I'd rather see a player rock that number 0 than a player rock that number 24 that hasn't earned it yet. Right? That number 24 means something, right? That number 0 ain't meant nothing yet. Now, 00, that's something different. That was obviously the great Jim Otto from the Raiders, so that means something. But just the number 0 doesn't mean anything yet. So that would be okay to see just some guy use it, burn it, and maybe it didn't work out as well than that number 24. Every time I see someone rocking that number 24, maybe it's just me with numbers. I see certain numbers. I remember even when I was playing basketball in school, and they're like, oh, here's your number. I was like, oh, no, you can have that 23 back. I don't want that. That's too much pressure. They give me 6, man. Give me Eddie Jones' number. Don't give me Michael Jordan's number. I don't need none of that. Right? That's no. 6 was not LeBron James' number when I was playing basketball. 6 was Eddie Jones' number when I was playing basketball. My man Brandon Kristoff tried to say LeBron. Do you know how old I am? LeBron was not playing basketball. That was Eddie Jones, old school Eddie Jones from the Lakers. And that would hurt my feelings when he got traded to the Miami Heat. But that's a whole nother conversation. So, yeah, interested to see who's going to rock that number 0. Also, this was kind of interesting that the NFL announced that teams can now have 2 Thursday night football games. The limit was 1, but it's changed. Flexing for Thursday night football, something that was rumored. That's not happening, at least not now. So there's that. Also, the NFL says there's no promises that all 32 teams are going to get a primetime game. They say they want to make sure that the team's competition level and their play, they're where it's a primetime. So there's that. That's kind of interesting as well. So I mentioned that Roger Goodell talked, and he really wrapped up. Well, my radio show ended at 5 p.m. Pacific time, and he was supposed to talk at 5 and ended up talking around 5:30. It was a little bit later, but he went in probably about 15, 20 minutes, and, it wasn't a whole lot of earth-shattering information. Talked a lot about the Washington Commanders, but also talked about the Thursday night football games, and just got a couple little sound bites that I wanted you to hear. Roger Goodell responding to a couple questions regarding Thursday night football, and the first one was from Judy Bautista. I thought this was a pretty interesting one because there was a lot of folks that weren't too happy about Thursday night football. I think all in all, everyone wants to get rid of it, but just with the conversation of it being a flexible game, there's a lot of owners, a lot of coaches that are not fans of it. So here's Judy Bautista's question about Thursday night football.
On the way out of the meeting, John Mara said he was adamantly opposed to the idea of flexing Thursday night games. He called the idea abusive and made a plea to consider the fans who go to the games. And he said, what are we thinking about? What is your feeling on flexing Thursday night games? And I know it's going to come up again in May, so where do you think it's headed?
We'll see. Listen, there isn't anybody in that room, anybody in any of our organizations who don't put our fans first. That's really important. Obviously, providing the best matchups for our fans is part of what we do. That's part of what I think our scheduling has always focused on. And flex has been a part of that. We are very judicious with it, and we're very careful with it. And we look at all of the impacts to that. And so before those decisions are made, I think we average, in the years we've been doing it, about a flex and a half a year. It can vary any particular year. So it's a very important thing for us to balance with what I would call season ticket holders and the in-stadium audience. But we have millions of fans who also watch on television. And so reaching them is a balance that you always strike, and making sure we do it right.
So that was the first question and response about Thursday night football and potentially being flexed. But then I thought Albert Breer, Monday morning quarterback, he asked a really good question. And in response to Patrick Mahomes putting out on Twitter that he wasn't a fan of potentially seeing two Thursday night football games, and even talked about kind of playing up to Amazon as opposed to playing up to the safety of the players. So here was a really good question from Albert Breer and another response about Thursday night football from Commissioner Roger Goodell.
Your players have been pretty consistently critical of Thursday night football and outspoken in the way they feel after some of those games. And the Super Bowl MVP, Patrick Mahomes, reacted negatively to the idea of having to play two Thursday night games in one season. And now you're talking about flexing games in and everything else. How would you respond to players who are concerned that maybe you're putting a broadcast partner in Amazon over their own interests in making some of these changes to Thursday night football?
I don't think we are putting Amazon over players' interests. We've always been looking at the data with respect to injuries and the impact on players. That drove our decisions throughout the first 12 or so years of Thursday night football and how it's evolved. And I think we have data that's very clear. It doesn't show a higher injury rate. But we recognize shorter weeks. We went through this in COVID too. We had to have a lot of flexibility in those areas. So those are obviously different circumstances. But we work very closely on that. I hear from a lot of players directly too. They love the 10 days afterwards. In fact, they call it a mini buy. And so there's some benefits on that side. So you have different views. You want to consider all of them, but players have different views, coaches have different views, and we have to try to balance all of that.
So there you go. There it is. There it was. Again, just a little bit of the conversation that Roger Goodell had to end the evening on Tuesday at the owners' meetings in Phoenix. Again, he went about 15, 16 minutes, and a lot of it had to do with the Washington Commanders and all the investigation going on with them and the potential sale going on with them. So it was nothing that was just earth-shattering and that it was going to be headline conversations all the time. But at the same time, as a commissioner, so you got to pay attention, got to sit in there and listen to it just in case he says something that's super interesting. And at some point, maybe I'll play a few more sound bites as I go through it. But I found those couple ones about Thursday night football to be pretty interesting. Coming up in segment 2, speaking of interesting, I had an opportunity to sit down with Raiders GM Dave Ziegler. I mentioned it on Tuesday's show that I wasn't sure if that was going to happen, but the Raiders made it happen. Shout out to my man Will Kiss, and I got an opportunity to sit down with the GM of the Silver and Black. So you'll hear that conversation coming up in segment number 2 after I tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is FanDuel. And we know that it's down to the final 4. Cannot wait to see who's going to cut down the nets. Right now is the perfect time to download the FanDuel app. It's America's #1 sportsbook, and they're giving new customers a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets. If your first bet doesn't win, all you got to do is go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. Sign up today to claim your no-sweat first bet. Then you can bet on anything. They got the money line, point spreads, who's going to be cutting down the nets, who's hitting the most three-pointers. You can bet, half a game, live betting. You can do anything you want on FanDuel. It's all in the app that's safe, secure, and it's super easy to use. So don't miss your shot at that no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Want to jump into it real quick. The conversation that I was able to have on Tuesday with Raiders GM Dave Ziegler. You heard from Josh McDaniels on Tuesday's show, but wasn't too sure if we were going to get to catch up with the owner, Mark Davis, or GM Dave Ziegler, just because I knew his schedule was super busy, and I know they're flying around the owners' meetings here in Phoenix, and was able to make it happen. Again, shout out to my man, Will Kiss, from the Raiders organization. He made sure that Dave Ziegler sat down with me. So without further ado, here's that conversation from Tuesday at the owners' meetings. Here with the Raiders GM, Dave Ziegler. And Dave, how you doing today, man? How's the owners' meetings been for you so far?
They've been good. It's good to see everybody. There's a lot of conversations to be had. You get to catch up on some business with a lot of the other teams that are here. Yeah. Just from a roster standpoint, and so that's always really valuable. Obviously, there's the league components and the rules and all of those types of things, and we also get to be in beautiful Phoenix, Arizona, where it's sun and the family's here, and they're having a good time at the pool and all that stuff. So it's a good little kind of it's work related. It's also a little bit of relaxation, which is a good kind of reset, because once we get back here and get in the building, we're going to be ripping and roaring on draft, setting the draft board, draft meetings. It's going to be, a grind all the way, up until the draft. So.
Right. Well, we're about, 3 weeks into free agency. It got started, obviously, a while back. What was kind of the strategy to going into free agency? Like, how were you trying to attack free agency and knowing that the draft was coming up at the end of April as well? Yeah,
well, I think, the free agency for us is, and for most teams, I think, is about attacking needs. And so a lot of times you go into the draft and you're going to go best available player. And so free agency is an opportunity to address the needs that you have and fill out some of those needs on your team. So when you get to the draft, you don't have that, you don't feel that urge to have to reach and to have to create some, create a guy, as a certain value just because you need that spot. And so, we were able to, answer some of those. You can't answer them all, but we were able to answer some of those needs throughout free agency. We were able to add, I think, what we wanted to do is add some players that were going to, I would say, fit our mold in terms of guys that are passionate about football, guys that are smart, guys that are dependable, and then have an element of explosiveness to their game and whatever that is. And I think we added some players like that, whether it was Robert Spillane, whether it was Marcus Epps, whether it was Jacoby Myers, and I could go on and on. But the goal going into free agency was, one, to address the needs, one, to improve our team in terms of the smart, tough, dependable, kind of the image that we want to, build this team in. And so I think we were able to accomplish some of those goals, and we have, we still have a lot of work to do too.
Well, it feels like a lot of those guys also have a lot to prove too, right? Yeah. They have that chip on the shoulder, like, give me that opportunity and I'll show you what I could do with it.
Yeah, and I think that's, that's a good point. And I mentioned that when I spoke to some people recently, is that's another part of the image we want to build. We want to have a team that's smart, tough, and dependable, has a high passion for football. We also want to build a team that has an edge, that has a chip on the shoulder, that guys that have that burning desire to want to prove things. And I think we added a lot. Whether it's Jacoby Myers, whether it is Robert Spillane, whether it's Duke Shelley, whether it's Brandon Faison, whether it's OJ Howard. I think we have brought in some guys that have that mentality, and that was part of our conversations that we had with some of these players when we were in negotiations and able to talk to them. And it was some of our conversations just as a staff on some of the players that we were targeting leading up to this. And, that's what we want the Las Vegas Raiders to look like. And, we wanted to mirror the fan base too in a bit. And I think when you look at the Raiders fan base, whether it's Las Vegas, whether it's Oakland, it's a lot of hardworking people.
Yeah.
It's a lot of people that have an edge. It's a lot of people that, have fought for, what they've gotten, received in life and things of that nature. And, there's an element of wanting the team to mirror some of that too.
Yeah, there's the passionate fan base, right? I mean, the fan base, good, bad, ugly, whatever, they're fired up at all times, right? Always fired up, ready to go, and love the silver and black. And so clearly the players that you brought in, they've shown that as well, even in the pressers. Even talking to Jimmy G, he said he was honest. He's like, hey, I don't know a lot about the Raiders, but my dad used to say they were badasses, right? And so I think that really went well with the fan base as well, kind of getting to know him. Does that alleviate a little of the pressure of saying, well, now we have to get a quarterback because you do have Jimmy G who's been there, done that?
Yeah, it definitely alleviates some of the pressure. I mean, I think if we were going into this draft and we didn't have, someone that was established at the position, there would be obviously a lot more pressure to get a quarterback and potentially, like as I mentioned, the potential to make a poor decision.
Right.
And so I think we can make, go in and make a smart decision. And again, we're not going to, if there's a young quarterback to draft that we, as an organization agree could be a future starting quarterback for the Raiders or whatever that may be, or a solid backup quarterback for the Raiders, whatever that may be, then we're going to do it. And so it doesn't necessarily doesn't take anything off the table for us, but it does put us in a little bit more of a comfortable position.
Right, no doubt. Raiders GM Dave Ziegler is our guest here on Raider Nation Radio 920, Unnecessary Roughness. You guys have 12 draft picks right now to work with. How exciting is that for you, knowing that you're putting this team together, working to put this team together, and last year you only had a handful of them because you made the big trade?
Yeah, it's exciting. I wish there was more. That there were maybe instead in the 6th and 7th round, there were
move them on up, right?
In the 2nd and 3rd round,
right? No doubt.
But
5 in the first 109.
Yeah, and even that being said, just when you have that many picks, you have some flexibility to be able to do some things, whether it's moving up, moving back, and it just gives you a little bit more freedom. And so we're really excited about that. We're excited about the opportunity to essentially, if it ends up being 12 players, infuse this roster with some youth, infuse this roster with some of the players that, meet the ideology and what we're looking for, as I mentioned, in football players, and help improve this team and put some guys on this team that are going to be staples of this organization for years to come. So it's really exciting, and we're really looking forward to putting in the work and getting to the point that we're ready to select the right players.
And I know I asked you in Indy, and you're not going to put a number on how many starters you're going to get out of the draft. I mean, that's unrealistic, but just kind of asked you in Indy how important it is to just get playmakers, and whatever you get at 7 or wherever you pick your first guy. Does that, have to be an alpha dog in your opinion at whatever position he plays?
Yeah, I think you want him to be an alpha. I think, it doesn't always work out this way, but the leadership abilities of that player, I think, are important. You would ideally like to draft someone that develops into a captain. I think on those, those premium picks, especially that first pick that you have in the first round. And so there's definitely some things that go into that. And like having guys that have that, that alpha mentality, that kind of dog mentality. Like we want to add more of those players into the explosive element. Like whether it's an explosive player on offense, whether it's a disruptive player on defense, people that make plays on the ball, people that can disrupt the pocket. Like we need more of that everywhere. And so that's definitely a focus. Going to be a focus going into this draft.
That was Max Crosby's exact words at the end of the season. We need more dogs.
Yeah. And we do, and I think when you have that, and again, there's a little bit element of time it takes to develop that, but I think, guys that when you have leads, when you're in those tight games, the mentality isn't, kind of just holding on, hoping to win the game. Right. No, the mentality is that we're going to go out this and we're going to win this game. We're going to put pressure on, we're going to put the pressure on. And that's an ideology of a collective group that has to be developed. I wish, it just happened, but it doesn't. You have to have the right people involved in that.
Right. Dave Ziegler is our guest, Raiders GM here on Raider Nation Radio 920, Unnecessary Roughness. What goes into the process of evaluating a player that may have a few issues off the field as well, but he's a talent on the field?
You have to do your due diligence, and I won't get into all the specifics, but there's I think you have to go the extra length in those situations, whether it's spending time with the player's family. You can't. Our college scouts do a great job in the fall, gaining information from, the sources that they get into the school, and that's highly valuable information. But there's going to be some guys that you're going to have to, do more work on and spend more time on, and to make sure that you feel like whether you're eliminating that player or that you're keeping that player alive, you have to there's extra work that needs to be done, and it's our responsibility to do that.
So when you look at the draft in general and putting this roster together, in your world, is it ideal that, hey, this is how we live each and every year, is really doing well in the draft and then being able to fill a hole here in free agency, but not having to depend on free agency? Yeah,
and I think the reason that's important is because when you talk about building culture and you talk about, like Max talking about, like, we need more dogs, when you bring a lot of guys, when you have to bring a lot of guys in free agency, you also bring a lot of guys that have other ways that they want to do things.
Right.
Yeah. You know how it is. Like, even if it's in the business world, like, you bring a new employee, and it's like, hey, we didn't do that.
Right.
We didn't do it this way here. We didn't do it that way here. And again, some people have good ideas where you reflect on what you're doing, and you may make some adjustments. But I think at the end of the day, like, we want to, when you bring in a draftable player, you educate them on what the Las Vegas Raiders expectations are, what it means to be a Las Vegas Raider player, and that's what they know.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so you have a lot more people steeped in that, then it's you're pushing that culture and that narrative in a collective whole, rather than a lot of people that maybe have questions about this and that. And so ultimately, yes, we want to get to the point, and we're not there yet, where we've drafted well enough over a course of years where when we go into free agency, it's very much a more strategic, like, hey, we want to get these four players, or these 4 spots, or even these 2 spots. This is where we need to add a premium player. We need to not only add the premium player, but we have to add the second tight end and the third guard and the 4th tackle. Like, you want those guys to be young players that you drafted ultimately, and then you're just being more strategic and more picky when you get into free agency.
Well, I wanted to ask you real quick about Josh Jacobs. We know you guys hit him with the franchise tag, and Raider Nation wants to see him back. I'm sure he wants to be back. You know, you guys would love to have him back in the locker room. How is things going with Josh, as far as, just whatever you could comment on just with him?
Yeah, well, we put the franchise tag on him, and then, we got into free agency. And so I'd say, there's been a few, surface conversations. We haven't really dug too deep into it as we've worked through free agency. We're going to be, getting out of free agency, and there'll be, some more conversations to be had. We'll see where it goes. At the end of the day, like we've talked many times, Josh embodies a lot of the stuff that we like, that we want our football players to have, and to go along with that, he's a really talented player, and we're going to be happy to have him in some way, shape, or form under contract for us, this year, and we'll kind of we'll take it step by step, and go through that. But we still, there's still some more work to be done.
But with that kind of a guy and that mentality and the kind of way he plays, like you mentioned, he's an important factor to have in that locker room around the guys.
He is, and he's a great example for young players. Just the way that he carries himself, and the way that he practices, and the way that he prepares, and it means a lot to him. He's smart, tough, dependable, and he loves football. And so, like again, he embodies a lot of that. And so, we're excited to have him here. He had a great year, and we're looking forward to 23 with him.
Final question for you: Neil Farrell Jr., Matthew Butler. They didn't get a whole lot of burn their rookie year. I asked Josh McDaniels how important it is for them to get into the mix, and he said they're already working out. They're at the facility. They stayed back. They're really hungry. What excites you about those two guys?
Yeah, well, one, I'm excited just in terms of that they made the decision, on their own independently to stay around Henderson and work at the facility, and really dedicate themselves to improving their body and their strength and their explosion and all those different things. I think that tells us a little bit about their commitment, and that it's important to them. And we expect not just them, but a lot of these players, and some of them are veterans too, just a second year in a system, as the first year on the job, no matter what you are, you might just be trying to figure out how the copy machine works, and where to get the coffee.
Let me tell you.
Right?
Let me tell you.
And then in year 2, a lot of those things that you had to put thought into, you don't, and then you think back like, man, I had to put thought into that,
Right.
And so I think with the continuity that we have with our coaching staff coming back almost intact, that there's going to be a level of comfort for our players that I think we are hopeful that we'll see a jump from a lot of these guys. But Matt and Neil are, there's an expectation there too, and they need to put in the work to do it. And we're hopeful that from what we've seen, that they're on the right path, and that we're looking forward to them in some shape or form to be contributing members here this year.
Well, sooner rather than later, the draft will be here, then training camp will be here, we'll be back at Allegiant Stadium, and the games will be going on, and it'll be like we haven't missed a thing, right?
That's right, and we're excited for that.
Exactly. Well, Dave, I know you're busy. Thank you so much for your time. I definitely appreciate you, and I'm sure my guy Freddie Coleman's probably on line one talking to, come on, I need you on the show now.
I'm ready. Freddie and Fitzsimmons, let's go.
Right. Well, you're on with me first, so there it is. Dave Ziegler from the Owners Meetings. Appreciate you.
All right, thanks, Q.
So there it is right there. Good stuff with GM Dave Ziegler. It's always good to catch up with him. I get to run into him every once in a while at the facility and talk to him for, a handful of minutes, but nothing like that in an intimate setting, a little one-on-one. So I know JT gets that opportunity quite a bit, and that was the first time I actually got to sit down with the GM. So good stuff. Hopefully you were able to take something away from that. Hopefully you enjoyed that conversation. I know I enjoyed talking to him. Coming up in segment number 3, your calls and texts straight off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. That's coming up next here on the Locked On Raiders podcast. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Rest. Again, live from the owners' meetings in Phoenix, Arizona. Everything is getting wrapped up, or everything actually wrapped up on Tuesday. And just going to wrap up the morning show on Raider Nation Radio 920. Myself, Vinny Bonsignor, and Heidi Fang. Of course, me and Vinny are in Phoenix, and Heidi's back in the home studio. And then we'll be making a beeline straight back to Las Vegas. So let's get into some of your calls and texts on your mind. Again, 707-654-4693. Slick Savage from the west side of Phoenix is calling here. He's calling to talk about the upcoming draft and what he thinks the Raiders should do, and also has a quarterback question. Here he is, Slick Savage, west side of Phoenix.
What's going on, Raider Nation? Q, I haven't called in a while. It's your boy, Six Savage from the west side of Phoenix. Just wanted to talk about the draft and us taking a corner or us taking a D lineman. Just in my opinion, I think that we need to take a D lineman, and whether it's Anderson or it's that big boy out of I think it's Georgia, I would rather have him, because I think that if we've got pass rush, then maybe our corners don't have to cover so long. And sounds like we got some decent guys in the fold this year. And one other thing, I would take that D lineman, but one other thing I wanted to talk about was this stuff at quarterback. What about the kid from UCLA? Is it Dorian Thompson-Robinson or DRT? How come he's not getting any pub? And we're talking about the kid from Florida, AR, and then Hendon Hooker. What's up with DRT? You got any input on him? He looks like he would fit the bill. He's a little smaller, but he reminds me of the quarterback from Bama. Instead of trying to trade up and take the quarterback from Bama, I think he's got a similar skill set that any team would be wanting to have, but about the same size. Actually, I think he's a little bit bigger. Watched a few highlights on him, looked at his stats. They're comparable to any of the top quarterbacks, but he's not getting any publicity. Just trying to see if you got any insight on that, Q. Raider Nation, have a good day, man, and go Raiders.
Thank you for the call, my man. Appreciate you. And I think either way the Raiders go, I know there's been a lot of discussion about D-line, defensive tackle, edge rusher, cornerback, and I know there's a lot of arguments, as you mentioned, if they get a better pass rush, then the corners will be better. Well, if you get better corners, then the pass rush could be better. They complement each other. So I don't really care what position they go with. I just want them to get the best player at that position. So if it's the best defensive lineman at the time that they go to pick, go get that guy. I mean, look, it's not like they only have one pick in the draft, right? I mean, they've got 12 picks. So regardless what you don't get in the first pick, you can get in the next pick and try to get in the next one. And the good thing about what they have going for them is they have 12 picks. They're not going to draft 12 guys. So they can use a couple of those picks. They can move and navigate around the draft, as you heard GM Dave Ziegler say that in segment number 2, and they could target a few players as well. So it doesn't really matter if they look at their big board when it's time for them to pick, and the best player available is a defensive tackle or defensive lineman, go get them. If the best player available is a corner, go get them, because they have so many holes and so many needs that they can't really be choosy. They just got to make sure they get an alpha. Again, that was something that I referred to when I talked to Dave Ziegler. You've got to get an alpha, especially with that first pick. If they're doing that, then everything else will work itself out. So I'm not really caring too much about the order of operations as far as that goes. And Dorian Thompson-Robinson, the quarterback out of UCLA, actually got a chance to talk to him at the Shrine Bowl when it was in Vegas. And he's actually getting some love lately from Chris Sims, and, take that for what it's worth. But he's a guy that he's a later round pick. Obviously, he's not going to be a guy that's going to go in the first couple of rounds. But I mean, he's a dude who works his tail off. He's a Las Vegas native. So maybe he's someone that they draft and let him sit and see what he can develop into. If he works out, great. If he doesn't, that's okay too. He's not a first round pick. So something Josh McDaniels has said is that he wants to get in the business of drafting quarterbacks quite a bit, right? Each and every year and seeing what they can do with these guys. So I wouldn't mind them taking a run at DTR. I mean, again, he's got some areas that he needs to improve, but he's not a guy that they would expect to go in there and start day one. So that wouldn't be a bad selection, obviously, for much later in the draft. But thank you for that call. I do appreciate you. Next up, got a text from Gio in Northridge, Cali. So ZQ, it's Gio in Northridge, Cali. Just wanted to make a comment that hopefully makes most Raider fans realize how lucky we are to have signed Jimmy G. I know everyone wanted Aaron Rodgers, even Lamar. Not only did we avoid getting rid of 2 of our first-round draft picks and a boatload of money, but we also dodged the drama. Look what's going on right now with the 2 hot quarterbacks this offseason and all the back-and-forth finger-pointing going on with these guys and their organizations. It's like every week we hear something new. The Jets are struggling to sign Aaron Rodgers, and even he is not being truthful about the communication with the Packers compared to what Brian Gutekunst said. And I personally don't like the idea of trading a first and a second for him and still pay his salary and still inherit his drama. As far as Lamar goes, I get he's young and really good, but the Raiders avoided having to trade their draft picks and the Deshaun Watson contract that Lamar wants. The Raiders signed a quarterback who wants to be a Raider, who we get for cheap and didn't have to trade for. A part of me is glad we got Jimmy G because at the end of the day, we avoided all this back-and-forth drama and trade offers that are going nowhere. Now we just have to focus on drafting great defensive players. Hopefully the divided Raider fans can find a kind of see that now too. Anyways, thanks for the opportunity to express myself, Q. So there you go. That's a pretty lengthy text right there from Gio in Northridge, Cali. And look, I was not a big fan of Jimmy G. I was not a big fan of the signing, but I get it. Right, and the only thing I don't like about him is not him as a person. It's not personal. He's a good quarterback. He's just not available all the time. That's the biggest thing. So I mean, as long as you make sure that you have a backup quarterback that you feel good in, I mean, then there's that, right? I mean, even Kyle Shanahan was asked at the owners' meetings about Jimmy G and the 5 years he was with the 49ers, what he meant to him, and he said he was a good quarterback. When he was healthy, he took us to the Super Bowl. When he was almost the healthiest, when he almost played a full year, we went deep into the playoffs, but he just ran into a lot of injuries with us. So, again, it's never anything personal with Jimmy G. They did save a lot of money by signing him, and, were they one Aaron Rodgers or one Lamar Jackson away from winning the Super Bowl? No, right? And so, I mean, they have an opportunity to build their team, and if Jimmy G's not the guy, then maybe they'll find their guy either this draft, maybe they'll find their guy next draft. I mean, it's one of those things. It's not going to be you snap your fingers and all of a sudden the Raiders are Super Bowl champ. They've got to build this team up, as, again, you heard Dave Ziegler say in segment number 2 of the show. So thank you for that text. I do appreciate you. I got time for one more. How about a call from Wine Country Raider? He's calling to respond to the call Tuesday about Raider fandom and what it did for me. What was it that made him want to be a Raiders fan? Here he is, Wine Country Raider.
What's up, Q? It's your boy, Wine Country Raider. And you had a guy call in saying, what about the Raider fandom and, that, feeds life, for you. And, man, I've been a Raider fan since I was a little kid. My uncle got me into it. Took me to my first Raider game. I saw him play the Panthers, and we were in the nosebleeds up in the Coliseum. But it was the greatest thing I've ever, experienced at the time, Walked in, it was like close to Halloween, so these guys, the outfits and the stuff were extra crazy. I mean, they were already wild, guys, Vader and all those guys out there dressed to the nines, decked out, but these guys it was crazy. And I went to about a Raider game every other year, growing up, and I never saw the Raiders lose until super recently. Actually, the last game in Oakland was the first loss I saw as a Raider fan. But, I've been to Vegas, saw them win against Philadelphia a couple years ago. Just the whole, as a Raider fan, if you're a Raider fan and your friends are any other fan of a different team, they hate you, you know, and it's the best. Like, I love being on one of the most hated by other teams. You know, I love that. I love the silver and black, you know, the pirate type vibe, you know, it's the best. You know, you go back and watch old highlights of, you know, the old days, and there you see the fans and they're just like biker dudes and just like, you know, just, it's always been badass. You know, you've always been like, you know, like an edgy, kind of intimidating crew, but when you're there, you know, they're like, everyone's like your best friend. You know, if you're wearing the right colors, you know, the fans are giving you high fives. I remember showing up to a game and next to us were these guys with full face paint, and they gave them to my aunt, and she painted me and my little cousins. You know, we were like 10 years old, and they're just painting our faces silver and black. It's just the best. You know, you always see Raider fans traveling well. Any game they're at, no matter where they're at, you see a bunch of Raider fans decked out, and I just feel like it's the best, like, fandom out there. People are always trying to copy us, say, you know, Steeler Nation or any of that BS, but, you know, it's only one nation, and that's Raider Nation. And I'm excited for this season. You know, bust out the gear. I mean, I wear it all year round anyways, but, you know, especially bust it out for season. So I just hope that, you know, the fans can stop all this infighting and just go back to what it was and rep no matter what, win, lose, draw, whatever. You know, it's Raider Nation, and we're here silver and black. So we died.
Thank you for the call, my man. And, you know, I mentioned the family element when it came to it, but there's so many different elements to the organizations that, you know, make the Raiders who they are. I can go back to growing up with a bunch of buddies that were 49er fans growing up in the Bay. You know, it was like, okay, you're either a Niner fan or a Raider fan. And because they all rocked with the Niners, I was like, oh, I don't want to follow you guys. I'm a rock with the Raiders. And it was cool, a little edgy, and you got to be a little, you know, crazy, or at least that's how we felt. So that was a lot of fun of it too. So, you know, you're talking about dressing up and all the, you know, all the costumes at the Collie. I mean, that's all, man, that's all great memories right there as well. So yeah, there's a lot of different elements that go into what made people Raiders fans. I mean, like my son, for example, he's a Raider fan because of me. He's basically just trusting the fact that I know what I'm talking about. Right? Unfortunately, it hasn't paid off for him yet, but he's trusting Dad knows what he's talking about, so there's that. So, I mean, you know, it's just one of those things, and that's kind of how fandom goes. There's always something that makes you latch on as a fan, so thank you for that call. Good stuff. And I do have time for one more text. Let's go ahead and get one more text in from Raider Dan in Rochester. Q, I got a simple question going into the draft. Assuming all these quarterbacks have some flaws, what would it take for Trey Lance? Assuming Brock Purdy is a starter, they just signed Sam Darnold. Why not send a 2 or 3 for him? That's Raider Dan in Rochester, and I'll just let you know that's not happening. That's not happened. Kyle Shanahan wants to see what Trey Lance has got. He did mention him. He's been injured. Brock Purdy's the leader in the clubhouse right now, but he's also injured. So I think that they have plenty of questions at the quarterback position, and I'll tell you who I don't think is it, Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold ain't it. I think it's pretty safe to say that we all know who Sam Darnold is, right? I mean, he's had how many opportunities now in the league? He just ain't it, right? I mean, he could be probably a good backup the rest of his career, but as far as a starter, he's not that guy. So I think that they have enough questions with their quarterbacks that are injured. Obviously, the elbow when it comes to Brock, and Trey Lance, well, just kind of everything. He seems like he's always injured. So there's that. They'll figure out what they've got to do at that quarterback position, but Trey Lance isn't a guy that's going to be going anywhere. And again, I mean, the Raiders just picked up Jimmy G. You know, let him rock to see what he does, and at some point they'll address the quarterback position. I would be shocked if they come out of the draft without a quarterback. I mean, I would be super shocked if that didn't happen. So, you know, just kind of let it play out how it is, and you don't have to give up extra capital to go get the guy unless he's your guy, right? And they tried to trade up to number 1. Carolina beat them to it. The Panthers, or not the Panthers, the Bears actually preferred DJ Moore over Darren Waller. Basically, what they tried to trade was very similar to the same thing, except for they had Darren Waller involved, and the Panthers had DJ Moore. So the Panthers, even though they had the number 9 overall pick, and the Raiders had the number 7 overall pick, that trade and DJ Moore was more appealing to them than the same trade with Darren Waller for the Raiders. So there's that. But thank you for that text, man. It's good stuff, and definitely appreciate all the calls, texts, all the feedback that we get on the Locked On Raiders podcast. So, again, what we'll be doing, we'll do the morning show with myself and Vinny, and depending on what time you're listening to it, it might already be over. Then we'll get in the car and drive back to Vegas and be back in the home studio Thursday morning. So there won't be any unnecessary roughness later on this afternoon. We're just going to kind of run it back with what you hear on the morning show. So there's that on Raider Nation Radio 920. But we will be back on the Locked On Raiders podcast. My dad's coming to town, too. So I want to get to town and check out my dad. He's driving in, so that'll be cool to be be able to catch up with him. So until Thursday, Raider Nation, we'll do it all again. We'll give you some more sights and sounds from everything collected from the owners' meetings, and bring it to you here on the podcast. So until then, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.